All right, so as Diana said, my name's Chris Bolin. I've been an UiPath MVP for 3 years now. We need to take that and change that to 3-time MVP. I've been using UiPath for 10 years. I've set up and established, I guess, 3 COEs in my career. I don't focus solely on COEs. I am a developer and I'm a solution architect, so I build solutions. I've been with Mary Kay Cosmetics. I've been with GameStop, and right now I'm with Anika Systems, which is a public sector partner of UiPath, and we primarily deal with federal agencies, IRS, Coast Guard, Air Force, things like that. So it's a little bit different. My world's a little bit different these days. With security badging and background checks and things like that. So we want to talk about what is a COE, because in my career of using UiPath, I get a lot of people that say to me, "Well, what does COE mean?" And basically, Center of Excellence. It's just a group of people at its simplest form. They may share experiences. They may share intellect with the solution. They may share insights. They may share training. They may share shared experience. And a COE can be anything. It can involve your RPA program. It can involve your AWS cloud program. It could involve your HR program. A COE can be anything. It's just a way for companies and organizations to focus intellect and brain power and experience, excuse me, on a solution or on a process or on a project or on a something that the company wants to focus that on. So that's basically what a COE is in its simplest form. So what we want to talk about in this first session, now I will tell you this, I'm going to give you this high-level textbook definition of everything. And when you get into the real world of COEs, you're going to realize that there are a lot of hybrids. There are a lot of things that, oh, well, Chris told us this, and I don't have those roles here. Or this is just a guide on, number one, explaining what a COE is. Number two, how to set that up in your organization. All right. The vision of the COE, I'm going to skip the agenda slide. Not skip the vision slide. COE in its best form, and I simply tell everybody that's trying to set up a COE or I've consulted with on setting up a COE or on the COEs I've set up with, that we want a steering committee. And the steering committee takes a lot of the pressure off your COE manager, your COE administrator. It is the hub of the organization that helps you operate what you're trying to do. Now, some organizations, and I have a friend, really good friend of mine, that works with a very large organization. His COE is expansive. And I marvel at his ability to manage his COE because it's so expansive. I work with other individuals at other organizations where their COE may be 2 or 3 people doing dual roles. But ideally, in those COEs, you set up a steering committee. And your steering committee, some COEs have an executive steering committee where you have someone from the CIO's office, someone from the CTO's office, someone from the CFO's office, or those persons themselves representing the executive committee. And we'll get into them a little bit in the next slide. But let's talk about the individuals you want on your steering committee. First off, a project manager. And I'm going to be quite honest with you, I used to be quite averse in my early RPA career to project managers because I felt in my world, I knew what was best, and I did the business analysis of the project, and I can control it, and I can schedule the meetings. But I found as I get into much larger projects that a project manager is crucial to my success, not only in automating processes, but also in prioritizing processes, communicating, because I was then taking all that work on my own. So you want a project manager that is familiar, or that you can familiarize with an RPA concept. Not all project managers understand what robotic process automation is. So you want to familiarize those people with that. incredibly important to any steering committee is someone from your information security. I always call them InfoSec. Especially if you're in a public corporation that is traded on Wall Street or on a stock exchange, private corporations that are audited from outside agencies like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, KPMG, or even especially in a public setting where you're working with federal agencies. There's a lot of security you need to consider. GRC models. You want to limit your bot security in certain ERP systems to just do what they need to do because of separation of duties. So an information security guy person is very important for your steering committee, and you're going to pound things off of that person all of the time. I worked for an organization, just to give you an example, where everybody had multi-factor authentication to log into the systems. They would get a message on their cell phone, they'd have to type in a code, or they'd have to click something on their cell phone in order to get into those systems. Well, bots don't have cell phones. And so we had to work out an entire system and schema and a process that would pass external audit, in order for our bots to be able to access systems. So an information security guy is vital to your steering committee. Functional directors. I talk about people, and a lot of this is going to start with where's your company's focus for your RPA program. Functional directors would be a director level or higher, vice president of your accounting team, of your distribution team, your warehousing team, your real estate team, your loss prevention team, if you have one of those. A functional director, you want these people involved in the steering committee. And you may not even be focusing on their automations or on their processes yet, but eventually you will. And your functional director's involvement in your steering committee is going to help with change management as you start to go into their departments. Plus, you always want your directors or vice presidents of those departments to understand what you're doing in their system, in their ecosystem. Are you freeing up people, and what are they going to do with those people? What projects do they have that those people can jump on? What processes are you exactly doing? They want and they need to know that. So you want to have functional directors, even if they're just sitting and listening, they're absorbing the knowledge and they can give input. And eventually you may be approaching their organization. I always limit my steering committee to one really sharp business analyst, because they have a view of your process and of your processes and what it takes to actually document and bring to the development team what needs to be done. So they know more about the inner workings of how your organization is set up, the documentation that your organization has. I worked for an organization that had no documentation of any of their processes. And that business analyst that we brought onto the steering committee worked with every department to start, and with internal audit as the lead department in this, to start the person's documenting what they do every day. And that business analyst was critical in building robust documentation, which then, when we started to approach those departments for automation opportunities, we had a very defined structure there because of that lead business analyst. IT rep for your COE, and I mean this is the person that's going to do your architecture. And depending on the size of your organization, it could be more complex, or less complex. So I always, and this is just historically how I've done it, I've always gone into the IT ranks and have recruited somebody that knows how to spin up a server. If your bots are sitting on our servers, or knows how to maintain those servers. In some organizations, IT people do your source control and promote things to your production environment. You have no say, you have really no control over that. You have the testing environment, no control over production environment, because of either vetting or security reasons. They have to go through some channels, especially in a federal sector environment. So I always involve at least one IT representative that's familiar with architecture and that I can really rely on to do that troubleshooting for me and do that advising at the steering committee level. Then you have your COE manager. Sometimes people call it a COE administrator, and this could simply be your lead developer. This could be the only developer you have. This could be a solution architect that used to develop. I prefer in my steering committees to use that COE manager to have been someone that solutioned, because they know how to approach a project from a very high level. They're involved in all the business and analysis steps from kickoff all the way to hypercare and sign off. So your solution manager is really ideal, but some organizations don't have those people. So you have your lead developer, someone that's very versed in how to build. And these people in a steering committee environment usually meet once a month, and you can do Scrum, or you can just show where you're at in your program, what's in the pipeline, and these people are going to be critical to help build your pipeline. And I will tell you in a few slides on how that may work out. So your roles of the steering committee. You're going to have a unified mission center automation. So the organization has a mission, and they brought on RPA. You have to forgive me, my mouth's dry because the air is dry here and I'm drinking iced tea. They brought on RPA to solve a problem. They invested money in UiPath, whether it be an on-prem instance, whether it be the platform, whatever solutions they've invested, they bought those because they want to use those. And they have an idea about around how they want to use those. So some organizations will start with one department. Some organizations will start with one division. Some organizations will start with a group of people, however they want to adopt it. But your steering committee guides that adoption. Your steering committee guides your pipeline. Your steering committee builds your pipeline. I had one CFO once that made it a mandate to all departments in the organization that they had to have 2 automations in their department every year. Now, great, that was job security for a lot of department developers and business analysts, but it's a heavy lift, especially in a large organization. So your steering committee is that group of people that helps you to maintain your COE, to maintain focus on what the overall mission is, because you will get people that will come to you and say, hey, can you automate this for me? And in our world, yeah, it's easy. I can build that in a day. I can automate that for you, but it may not be anything that has to do with the mission. It may just be somebody that says, oh, it'd be nice to automate this. Or I really wouldn't, I hate doing this part of my job. Maybe I can give it to the RPA COE and they can build it for me. And in most instances, we can. But your steering committee is the one that focuses your attention and prioritizes your quick wins, your low hanging fruit, your must-haves, and things like that. So that prioritization is very important. Adoption and evangelism. So let's be honest. As a developer, and I don't know how many are on the call have ever worked in a COE or launched a new UiPath RPA project, or even a generative AI project, or anything that involves a large language model or a chat bot or anything like that. There's an overall fear in people that you're going to automate their jobs away. And it's a very real fear. And a lot of that depends on the focus of your organization. But change management, adoption, and evangelism is a very important role of your steering committee, because they're the ones that have that authority and that power. And I know that's a bad word to use, is power, but that authority to drive your RPA program into those different departments and help to counter that fear of people. And certainly in our world, we can always say, well, we're building automations to bring about productivity and to put people around a conference table and come up with ideas. And that's ideally the goal. That's not always the result. And in almost all of the COEs I've built in my career, and I've built over 400 automations in my career. What we find is people leave, or roles are not filled again. And I think that's just a natural byproduct of automation and technology and the advancement of technology into generative AI and things like that is if you don't keep up with the technology, you don't keep up with your job, you don't reach out to learn new things, then you're yourself putting your job at risk. But it happens. That's not the ultimate goal of automation. The ultimate goal of automation of UiPath, at least back when we first started, we always used to coin the term "we do the dumb work," and we do. But with the advancement into intelligent automation and generative AI and autopilot and communications mining and things like that, we are finding much more that we're able to push our bots and our automations into the boundary. And I built an automation just recently, I guess about a year ago, that, and I think I've told you this, that read signatures off of journal entries for an organization and compared those signatures to the person's actual signature and was able to then find instances where the signatures didn't match. It was referred on to a manager, and that manager had to step into an action center type of environment and make sure that that journal entry was valid. Now, in one of those instances, there was a young lady, and I'm not going to name names or details, that had made some wrong decisions in her life, and the bot noticed that the signatures that were coming from her desk were not valid, and eventually it was discovered that she was doing some dishonest things. So with those advancements in technology and the ability to actually, back in the day when we built bots, it was always rule-based, redundant work, but now we're doing cognitive stuff with bots. So that change management, that education of your workforce and the involvement of your directors and your C-suite and is the smoothing factor, because I've been in a situation in the COE where the mission of the organization was a little bit different than, and was something that I didn't learn until I actually set up their COE. But there was, people hid under their desks when I came to talk to them at their cubicle. So because of that, the way the steering committee had focused their attention. All right. So let's know our organization. Here's how we need to know our organization before standing up a COE. Is our organization going to have citizen developers? That means if these people are going to learn Studio X and build things on their own. So you want to ask yourself, if that's the goal of organizations, I mean, we used to talk about a bot for everyone. If that's your goal of your organization, how do you maintain that? How do you review their code? How do you govern a model like that? How do you make sure that what they're building falls in line with if you're a public trade company, Sarbanes-Oxley? How do you know that those citizen developers are building what they should build, and that they're building it correctly, and they're not going to go in and crash some system because they put a bot into whatever they're doing on their desktop? So that brings this whole, and this is a big thing with citizen developers, and I agree with the whole philosophy of a bot for everyone. However, I think what we need to understand is that we need, when we say everyone, we really need to start slowly and ramp that up and scale that up from a very slow progression, because people get excited about new technology. When they achieve something, a hello world, for example, they want to build another hello world. So we have to be very careful on how we do that with citizen developers. And that brings a different dynamic to your COE. Do you need to bring on a testing team? Do you need to bring on maintenance? Do you need more IT people? Do you need more developers that focus just on maintenance? And I've worked with COEs where they had a whole maintenance team, and it would go to the developers, then it would go to a separate testing team, and then if needed maintained, it went to a maintenance team. Separate entities entirely in the COE, and this was a large COE. But that's something you need to bring into your vision and into your planning is, are we going to have citizen developers? Are you going to be siloed to one division? Yeah, and it's funny in working with COEs when I've been asked to set up COEs, it's mostly been at the bequest of CFOs, chief financial officers, or someone very high up in the organization that deals with the financial department. Because it seems initially that when we work with RPA, that those tasks seem to be the easiest to automate, the most your low-hanging fruit, which is high value, low code, quick wins. Those kind of things usually are found in a finance department. And once you start automating in a single department, let's say your tax department, which is very much centric to Excel spreadsheets and things like that, or you start automating in your accounts payable department or your accounts receivable department, you're going to find a lot of growth in a financial. So usually in the COEs I've worked with, the chief financial officer has been really the champion for RPA in the organization. And the risk we have there is that chief financial officer wants you to keep finding things within that finance department. And yes, you can build end-to-end automations from an accounts receivable or an accounts payable all the way down to the point where you're recording these into your company retention system. And there may be 7 or 8 separate automations between those points. But I think what we find is we become siloed in our COE focus. So you may have the same amount of opportunity and the same amount of cost savings and the same amount of opportunities to reinvest people in different tasks or retrain people in different areas in your real estate department, in your facilities department, in your manufacturing department, in your supply chains department, or in your purchasing department. And if you stay focused on just the CFO's focus, you're going to be stuck in the finance department. So you really want to understand what the focus of the organization is. Are we going to be stuck to a single division, or are we going to be organization wide? And if that is the case, what's your priority? Is your priority the financial area? Is your priority supply chain? Is your priority procurement? Where do you want to start when we do a launch? And then what's your next step? And these are things that, as a COE administrator and part of that COE team, and even that COE steering committee, is important to know, because that helps guide what we'll talk about in our last session, scalability. Very important. Are you replacing legacy systems? And we use RPA. You'll find, and I'm sure a lot of you are developers or work in organizations with RPA, that we're replacing legacy systems, or we're connecting legacy systems to more modern systems. Whether we're connecting a third-party SaaS solution to a company-wide ERP solution, and in some companies, you may have, in one company I worked with, they had 15 different ERP systems, if you can imagine managing something like that. So you're connecting data from one system into an ERP system, and you're the go-between, and that's your role that's the role of that automation. So you want to understand, am I replacing legacy systems? What are the restrictions of those legacy systems? What am I able to get into these legacy systems? And especially if you're working with third-party solutions where you're not even hosting those solutions. How often do these systems update? How often does my ERP system update? How often do we patch? These are all very important considerations that we make when we're starting to build that automation COE and focusing where it's going to be. I have worked in an organization, as I briefly mentioned, where the goal of the CFO was to replace people. And unfortunately, that goal is whether to save SG&A costs. And I'm trying to be politically correct when I say this. The drive of the CFO to replace SG&A in full-time headcount equivalents made people terrified of the RPA program. You didn't get adoption. You didn't get the change management is hard to control. And people would see people leave once we started automating because that was the goal. So when we started automating in that department or that division, and the return on what we call return on bots or return on robots investment was started to flower and bloom, the CFO started telling people that they need to cut staff. Is that a valid use of RPA? Yes, it is. And unfortunately, that's part of what we do, and it's just a side effect of what we do. Is it difficult model to work within? Absolutely a difficult model to work within, because you're the bad guy. And if you're involved in that kind of COE, it makes your job very difficult to do and to code. And we find in building COEs that in that type of environment, coding is a much slower process. It takes longer for a developer to actually build an automation because the motivation to build the automation just isn't there as it is in situations where the developer's actually seeing the fruit of the automation make someone's job easier. Instead, we're making someone's job gone. So you want to understand within your COE if that's the mission of the organization. Are we replacing people, or are we giving people an opportunity to learn different things, and are we giving the organization an opportunity to focus more on strategy and ideation and focusing on the customer, innovating, getting rid of all this redundant work that we promise that we get rid of or that we can get rid of, and actually making an impact in those people's daily lives, where if you've seen the UiPath videos where work becomes fun. Who's the owner of your RPA COE? And I have varying opinions in my mind about how this should be set up. And I will revert back to how RPA was first expounded back in the early 2012, 2010, 2012, when it was really ramping up as a popular tool. It was a business-facing tool. And it was a way for business units, since they knew the processes and they knew what they needed those processes to accomplish, RPA was launched as a way for these business units to develop their own develop the automations and automate their work within those business units. Then you have some organizations. I consulted on a COE set up for a major retailer, not GameStop, but a major luxury retailer. And they wanted their automation to be centered within the IT department. And I respect that. And the advantage of doing that is your IT department knows the infrastructure and knows the architecture, and but the IT department doesn't necessarily know the business processes. And we found that me and some other people actually did some informal studies, got together and talked and did some informal studies of different COEs we've worked with. We found that when we center RPA within an IT organization, the scalability becomes much more slower and much more difficult because IT folks don't necessarily know, like I said, the business processes. So they're taking longer to learn those business processes than someone that on the business side that actually knows the steps and the exceptions would. Some things I don't mention on this slide. Let's talk about the role of your business analyst. I'm a complete advocate of having a separate role of a BA within an RPA COE. And I'm very accustomed to developing two different ways in my career. I've developed using me as acting as a BA, which gives me more insight as a developer, but also becomes a little bit more difficult when I have to work with the SME and still develop, right? and then working from a functional document, a PDD that's been well developed by a BA, which still has limitations because you still need to communicate with the business team. But you have that intermediary person, that BA, that has built those relationships with the business team and knows who to talk to and knows how to answer the questions. Recent experience with where I'm at Anika, building an automation for a federal agency, and it involves certain kind of input coming into that federal agency system from their employees. And I asked the BA, I wonder if all of these start with the same number and the same letter combination, because in my mind, I'm thinking regex, right? I'm thinking a regex statement. He said, I don't know. Let me find out. And about 15 minutes later, he came back and said, yes, they do. So for me to actually have to stop that build, refocus, and go answer that question myself may not sound too difficult, but it also means I'm removing my focus and I have to recenter my focus. So BA is, in my opinion, a very critical part of your COE and how you build your COE. Then you want to manage expectations. Your executive branch of your executives on your steering committee or your executive steering committee can often have a pie in the sky expectation about what RPA is going to do for the organization, how fast it's going to do, because they've seen UiPath presentations, they maybe went to Forward, they've maybe gone to a road show, and they've talked to sales agents, and they're very excited about what we can do with automation in our organization. We can ramp it up, we can do all of this stuff, but you have to manage those expectations because we don't live necessarily in a world of unicorns and rainbows where we have sprinkles on our ice cream. We need to understand and we need to communicate and manage the expectations of how much our developers can do, how much our BAs can do, what's the time bandwidth that we will have access to subject matter experts, systems. Do we have test environments? And we'll get back into that a little bit later when we talk about architecture. But managing those expectations and bringing a CFO or a CIO, not necessarily with the CTOs, because the CTOs I've worked with in the past, they're very grounded and they very well realize, man, that's a big ask and a big lift in a short period. So they're pretty well on your side because they've worked in the technology part. But to kind of ground those people a little bit and give a realistic expectation of how fast can you build an automation? Well, it depends on the automation. They don't like that answer necessarily. I've built automations in 4 hours. I've built automations in 2 weeks. It just depends on the complexity of the automation, what you're asking me to do. So as long as you can manage the expectations of the thought leaders and your steering committee and your executive leadership team and the functional directors and even the SMEs, when you can manage those expectations effectively, then you actually have a much smoother ride in building, which is important, especially with SMEs, subject matter experts or process owners, we call them. It's kind of like we do both. They've already, in their minds, they've given you the process, they've done their part, so now let's build it. And that doesn't necessarily mean your BAs can work on different projects and put them in the prioritization queue and say, I'm not sure how many people use Automation Hub, and say these are ready to go, but they're a lower priority, and they just happen to be working with that business team on another opportunity, and those are lower priority. Well, in your SME's mind, or your process owner's mind, they've done their part. Where's my automation? So as long as we're upfront, we're forward, and we can demonstrate that the prioritization, the rules, and how we're managing those expectations, very important, not only in adoption, but ongoing support. And any of these people you're working with on these teams, your functional directors, your SMEs, your process owners, even the people that are working the cubicle next to the Susie who was doing this process before, now she's doing funner things. They become your champions. They become your evangelists in the organization. and they help to foster and to help scale your entire automation program. So let's talk about roadmap timeline. And I know we're running at 20 minutes. I want to leave some time for questions and answers. Let's talk about roadmap timeline. Again, you may have some leaders and some executives that want it done yesterday. And I've been in situations like that. I had one, just as an example, we had a call, a steering committee briefing, and with her, we had them every 2 weeks, these briefings. And she said, well, why aren't you working on this opportunity here? I said, well, it hasn't gone through the BA yet. We know little about it yet. It hasn't been on your prioritization as a higher priority. And she said, well, I already fired the consulting group that was doing that, and I've already banked the savings from that in our budget. Well, you didn't tell us that. So our priorities pivoted within a span of a 30-minute call. So your roadmap's going to have some blockers like that. It's going to have some people that want things right away, and then their priorities change 2 weeks down the road. So you need to have some flexibility in your roadmap. You need to be realistic in your roadmap. This is what we're going to do, when we're going to do it. This is our anticipation. And that roadmap needs to be a living and working document that you share with your COE, so everybody's on the same roadmap. All right, let's talk about licensing. One of the things that you really need to know, really need to evaluate when you're talking about your RPA, especially when it comes to scalability, is you want to plan well on your licensing, and you want to become best friends with your UiPath representative. You want to meet them. You want to tell them what the company's mission is. You want to tell them, is the company investing in the platform? Are you doing a la carte solutions? Are you doing on-prem? Are you just going to do Orchestrator and Studio? You really want to work closely with UiPath because you want to position your COE in a manner where you can scale it, and you can scale it quickly. Because once you start catching on, and once people start and your pipeline grows and grows and grows, they may hire another developer, say grow more, and you don't have the licensing capacity or the bandwidth, and you're in mid renewal. And this happened to me. We had to redo the licensing for the entire COE. And we had to call on some relationships with our UiPath people to help us facilitate that within a 2-week period. So you really want to look at your licensing and compare your licensing to what the steering committee wishes to do. Finally, let's talk about, maybe I didn't put it in this slide. I don't think I did. Let's talk about Agile, an Agile organization. Agile is just a way of breaking down your software development lifecycle into what we call sprints. So and it works in features and sprints, and a sprint's usually 2 to 3 weeks long. And it helps us manage our work. It helps us manage those expectations. It helps us break down a larger project into manageable, smaller stories that can be demonstrated, that we can demo at the end of that story, that we can talk about in Scrum, or that we can talk about with our COE, our steering committee, our champions, whatever it might be. And I used to not, when I first started with RPA, I knew nothing about Agile. I'm not going to lie. And I mentored a young woman and her team that worked for another organization, a public sector partner, 2 years ago. I mentored her team through the RE framework because they weren't using it. And she mentioned Agile, and so we talked about it, and I did some research on it. And I realized how well an Agile organization fits in with RPA development. Let's say you have a feature, I'm going to build an automation that does this. And then you can break that down into 2-week sprints. In this first 2 weeks, I'm going to build this piece. Or the BA is going to come up and he's going to do this part. And those sprints can be managed and closed and marked off as you progress. And it's an easy way of demonstrating your progress on an automation. And if you run into a blocker, you can note that in your Agile sprints, I'm blocked on this, and then you can justify why you're moving on to the next automation until this blocker's this blocker is resolved. I found by incorporating an agile work development into my RPA COEs has been actually a game changer in how we have been able to really not, and we'll talk about scalability later, but scale. And we may approach this again when we get to the scalability piece, but also in how to manage work and take the pressure off of developers and business analysts and focus them on tasks. And it's helped us to, in all the situations where I've incorporated agile into a COE, it helps to prevent scope creep. And we've all dealt with that. Well, you've done this. Can you do this in that automation as well? It really helps to focus our efforts into a easily used planning process. So if anybody's working a COE or thinking of building a COE or is launching a COE, I would definitely check into an agile process, an agile environment, and see how you can incorporate that. Because I will guarantee you that you're going to find that to be an incredible benefit if you incorporate it very early in your COE, because it's a little bit more difficult to incorporate later in the road. All right. I've talked until I'm hoarse again. My throat's dry. I apologize for that. Does anybody have any questions for me on the part about just launching a COE, the foundations of what to consider when you're doing a COE? I'm not shy, so don't be shy.
You guys feel free to open up your mics too and just ask directly.
Hey, Chris. Yeah,
Hey.
it's Joe here. How are you?
Hey, Joel, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Well,
Hey, Joel, how was Summit, by the way?
Oh, was awesome. Was awesome. Yeah, my first time there. I couldn't be happier, to be honest. Yeah, it was an amazing event. And
I
Diana
had to get
Diana
that
is the
plug in.
best.
I had to get that plug in for Diana. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so Chris, here's the thing.
Yep.
I am on my journey to create a COE actually,
Okay.
and we are a very large organization,
Mm-hmm.
and there's actually already a few what I don't know pseudo COEs or if they are in fact COEs, but I am on the enterprise level, so I want to create an enterprise COE more or less. And I was hearing to you and your thoughts on the steering committee, and that was one of my thoughts actually as I am planning. Like the steering committee gives this idea of executive level, right?
Right.
And that's I don't know if that's what I want. And as you said, there's a lot of customizations on each COE, right? So
Right.
I don't know if
Well, I will tell you, if I understand what you're asking. Do you need to have executives on your steering committee? Is that what you're asking? Or
yes, I would say it would be more a working committee, RPA working committee, right? With more
well,
hands-on people.
and it could be, and keep in mind, you don't have to have all these roles on your steering committee. Um,
Hmm.
I've worked in COEs where these roles, or a lot of these roles, the BA, the DOE manager, the lead developer, they were all one person, right?
Hmm.
That could wear those three hats. But I will tell you this, Joel, I you will have much more success in setting up an RPA COE if you involve someone from your company's executive, your C-suite,
Hmm.
because your is your RPA already well advanced in this organization, or is it brand new?
No, it's well advanced in other RPA platforms.
So
And
you're trying
UiPath
to
is relatively new.
are you trying to build a pipeline, or what are you trying to do with your COE?
Uh,
I guess I'm
well,
asking,
there,
why are
there's
you
a
doing a COE now if you haven't done it
yeah.
in the past?
Well, because now we are establishing UiPath. In the past,
Okay.
it was not UiPath. They didn't have that concept of COEs. They just
Uh-huh.
have development teams, right?
So you're using other solutions.
Yes, yes,
Okay, I
yes.
see. Well, a COE, I will say, I don't recommend building a COE without a steering committee, right? Because you want that entire organization footprint, or as far as you're taking this UI path at the onset, you may be focusing on one division, one department, maybe a few here and there, but you want a steering committee and a steering committee that meets at least once a month, because you want those people to be involved, because they're going to be your change evangelists, your change managers, and your champions, right? I will say that you're going to find that steering committee to be much more successful in my history of building steering committees. Let me give you a little bit of what that is. I've built a COE for an organization that was decentralized, right? We had a COE, two COEs in North America. We had a COE in Mexico. We had a COE in Russia. And the COE in North America was centered on the business processes. One of them was on the finance department and HR. And the other COE in North America, now this was a very large organization, was focused on supply chain and IT. And that helped us to break that down, right? And then we had a COE in Mexico that handled our Latin America, Brazil, and Mexico organizations. And then we had a COE in Russia that did all of our European organizations. And then I've advised or built COEs where it's a much smaller, centralized. But in any of those COEs I've built, it's always been vital to me to have somebody that had a C-suite. Not necessarily, you don't have to go and sit down in front of the CTO, CIO, or CFO and say, hey, will you be on my COE? It could be a representative of that office that can then communicate to that individual, because that individual is going to be the one that helps you drive it through the organization as you start to scale. And it's also going to be that individual that's going to be the person that helps get rid of blockers for you, whether it be system access or security or more help, another developer, right?
I see your point. So yeah, and then I think I got what I needed.
Yeah,
I already have that person.
Yeah, I'll say this one other thing, Joel. When I was in GameStop, my CFO was on the steering committee, and she said to me, "What do you need?" I said, "I need a war room. I need a room with tables and marker boards and video screens and all this stuff, because I wanted to bring somebody in that one room, and we could brainstorm together instead of doing it on Teams, because you'll find that people start thinking when ideas generate when they're talking in a relaxed environment or in one room, right? They're not being distracted by the dog that decides it wants to be acting like a dog in the background on a Teams call. And I said, I want a refrigerator there. I want to have water, and I want to have juices. I want to have snacks. And in 2 weeks, because of me talking to her and justifying why I wanted this, the company partitioned off this whole area for us to have this, what we call the war room. And it was critical. I mean, absolutely critical in spreading RPA through that organization even more, because people like to interact with people in person, whether we think it's nice to work at home on Teams and maybe mark ourselves out for a meeting and take a nap, or say, hey, we're in an emergency meeting and we're actually looking at TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. People like to interact with each other, see expressions, talk, laugh. And so someone that's in those higher roles, Joel, is going to be much more able to push a change like that down to the people that need to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I see your point. That's a great point of view.
But thanks for the question, Joe.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Hey, Chris, it's Karen Stewart. How are you?
Oh, my favorite person.
How are
Hi,
you?
how have you been?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. We'll catch up. But I do have a question on the agile part of it.
Yep.
So do you find what we found was that they wanted to add things on. So as we got through one part of it and we thought we were finished, they were like, well, it's agile, so let's add this next little piece.
Scope
And
creep.
so we ended up in a never-ending project.
Yeah, and that's scope creep, and you and I have talked about agile before.
Yes.
I've known Karen for years. Wonderful person. Scope creep. That's governance, Karen. That's going to be something that your COE, whoever's running your COE,
Yeah.
needs to set up as a different feature or a different user story outside of what you've done. You've built what that feature said to build, right? And if you want to control that scope creep, then you put it back in the pipeline. You say, if you want scope creep, we will revisit it when it becomes a priority again. But right now, what we built for you is working, right?
And I was wondering if that's how you did it, because that's what we've been doing. Is
It
that
is how we do it.
we have the use case, the initial use case. When I get to the end of that use case, we're done. If you want another feature, you put it in the pipeline as a BCR about change requests, and we will be glad to do that for you when it comes back up in the pipeline. But I can't do it now. I have to get to the end of this one. I just wondered if you did it differently with Agile.
No, because your definition of done, and if anybody works in an agile environment, we know what definition of done means, right? Your definition of done is you've met their initial expectations. You've met their expectations with no technical, no, what we would call it, technical, not liability. Anyway, anything that's not done that you promised to be done. You've completed the project as it was stated in that feature, and you've outlined the steps that you've been taking, the sprints you've been taking. If they want something added on, that's a different automation. You're building something onto something. Right now, it's doing what you're supposed to. You told us to do, right? But that's a governance thing, and no, we do not do scope creep, even in an agile. And it's easy for someone to say, "Hey, well, you're still in a sprint." No, we're done.
No, we're done. I promise you, we're done.
Yeah. But I will tell everybody that's on the call, Karen is the one that got me interested in agile.
I had lots of questions for Chris. I mean, I bombarded him at times with questions because I just wanted to soak in all the knowledge.
Yeah, you're the guilty one for agile. But yes, we need to reconnect and talk and chat and find out what's been going on. Anybody else have any questions? All right, Diane. I'm giving you 3 minutes back, Diana. I will quit.
Yeah, just remember in chat, everybody, that I did put the URL for tomorrow's session, so I'll just let that open for another minute so you can grab that and sign up. These sessions are really good. It just provides you with a lot of information. And so with that, thank you, Chris, for presenting tonight, and thank you all for attending, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.